the entire story of Norse mythology, a slow journey for a restful night. Tonight, we drift through the old northern cosmos, from the first breath of frost and fire to the green morning after the world ends and begins again. If your eyes grow heavy, let them. The story will carry you softly. Our map is simple, a vast emptiness called Ginnungagap. To one side, Niflheim, the land of cold and mist. To the other, Muspelheim, the land of blazing heat. Where chill met spark, something living stirred. In the center of all things stands Yggdrasil, the great ash, the tree that binds the worlds. Remember this name, Yggdrasil. We will return to it, again and again. Around the tree rest the realms. Asgard, home of the Æsir. Vanaheim, home of the Vanir. Alfheim, the bright land of elves. Midgard, the human middle world. Jotunheim, the land of giants. Svartalfheim and Nidavellir, the shadowed places of dwarfs and deep forges. Helheim, where many of the dead dwell in quiet. And the far fires, Muspelheim, with its watchful flame. Beneath the roots are 3 wells. Urd's well, where fate is tended. Mimir's well, where wisdom lies silent and deep. Hvergelmir, where cold waters begin their many journeys. At Urd's well sit 3 figures, the Norns. Urd, what has been. Verdandi, what is becoming. Skuld, what must be. They lift water to keep the tree fresh, and they mark every life with a thread. Yours, mine, even the paths of gods. Rest your eyes. We begin. From the meeting of frost and flame came Ymir, the first giant. From the melting rime came the gentle cow, Audumla. She licked the salty ice, and from the ice a figure emerged, Buri, the first of the gods. Buri's son Bor wed Bestla, and they had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. The brothers looked at the chaos around them and chose to shape it. They stilled the old tumult by slaying Ymir, and from that vast body formed the world. The sea from his blood, the earth from his flesh, mountains from his bones, the sky from his skull. They set sparks in the sky as stars. They lifted the vault and set 4 dwarfs to hold it steady. Ostri, Vestri, Nordri, Sudri, east, west, north, and south. They made the sun and the moon travel the sky, chased by wolves that never quite catch until a much later day. They set stones, named rivers, fixed shores. The world took a steadier breath. One quiet day, Odin and his brothers walked along a sea-washed shore. They found 2 pieces of driftwood, 1 ash, 1 elm. They shaped them into human form. Odin gave breath. Vili gave mind and movement. Ve gave form and warmth. The man was named Ask, the woman Embla. From these 2, humans began. A small gift and a great responsibility. To be awake, to be mindful, to be warm with life. Fate flowed with the rivers, and the gods sought wisdom. Odin, the wanderer, wanted more than strength. He wanted knowledge that binds and loosens, knowledge that heals and quiets and warns. He came to Yggdrasil and gave himself to himself. He hung upon the tree for 9 long nights, wounded by his own spear, without food, without drink, listening to the winds speak through the branches. At dawn, the shapes of power opened, the runes, not only letters, but keys to memory, to vows, to calm, to counsel. He learned them one by one and stepped down, changed, not louder, but slower, as if each word now weighed the right amount. There is another kind of knowing, the woven kind, Saida, the craft of seeing and shaping possibility. Freya, radiant and resolute, knew this art and brought it among the gods. Odin learned it too, though some frowned, because wisdom matters more than custom, and sometimes to guide a world you must listen deeper than pride. Rest here and let the names become familiar. The gods of Asgard, The Æsir were many. Odin, wise and watchful. Frigg, keeper of foresight and care. Thor, friend of humankind, strong-armed, thunder-footed, laughing, steady as a hill. Baldr, bright and beloved. Tyr, the straight hand of law and courage. Heimdall, keen watcher on the Rainbow Bridge. Bragi, whose words fall like music. Idunn, who keeps the apples of youth. Sif, of the golden hair, of good earth and harvest. Others too, each with a place in the great house. Beyond Asgard lay Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir. They were close to the breath of fields and sea, Njord of the coast winds, Freya of good seasons and peace, Freya of love, grace and deep knowing. In old time, the Æsir and the Vanir met in conflict, then made peace, exchanging trusted ones as a sign of truce. Njord, Freya and Freya came to Asgard, and the halls became fuller. From that peace also came Kvasir, a being made of all-wise speech, so wise that his blood, on a later day, would be turned into the mead of poetry, and those who drank from it would find words becoming steady and sure. The world was not divided into good and evil alone. Giants, the Jötnar, were not simply foes. They were the raw shape of mountains and storms, neighbors at the edges, sometimes enemies, sometimes kin by marriage. Dwarfs, skilled in hidden places, crafted marvels from the bones of the earth. Elves, bright and quiet, moved like early light through groves. Land spirits watched the hills and bays. Valkyries rode the air, choosing the fallen to join Odin's company. And in the dark corners of stories, the Draugr, the restless, reminded the living to tend their oaths. From dwarf forges came treasures that would colour every tale. Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, a comfort to humans, a warning to trolls, a promise that storms could be steered away from farmhouses. Gungnir, Odin's spear that never misses its mark. Draupnir, the ring that drops copies of itself, a sign of plenty and repetition. Skidbladnir, Freya's ship that folds like cloth and always finds a wind. Brisingamen, Freya's necklace, warm as sunrise. Gullinbursti, the golden bristled boar, bright as a lantern on winter fields. And Gleipnir, a ribbon soft as silk but stronger than iron, woven from things that seem not to be. The sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. Remember this ribbon. It will return. Now, the long middle of the age, stories that move like tide. We begin with a wall, a horse, and a choice. A builder came to Asgard and offered to raise a mighty wall around the halls, so strong that no giant could breach it. He asked for a great price, the sun, the moon, and Freya's hand, and promised to finish in one season if he could use his horse, Svadilfari. The gods argued. The task seemed impossible. They agreed with one rule, no help beyond the horse. As days passed, the wall rose too quickly. The horse hauled stones like a living mountain. The gods grew worried and looked to Loki, the shapeshifter, the fixer of tight corners, the maker of tight corners. Loki chose a strange path. He turned into a mare and lured Svadilfari from his work. The wall remained unfinished. The bargain failed. The builder's true giant nature was revealed, and he met a quick end. Later, Loki returned, and in time gave birth to a foal, Sleipnir, grey and eight-legged, the finest of horses. Odin took Sleipnir as his steed. Not every solution is tidy. Sometimes the world is mended with an odd stitch. Rest your eyes. We continue. One morning, Thor reached for Mjolnir, and his hand met empty air. The hammer was gone. Without it, the rim of the world felt thinner. giants might cross. He asked Loki to search, and Loki borrowed Freya's falcon feather cloak. He flew to Jotunheim and found the thief, Thrym, a giant with hands like rocks. Thrym laughed and said, "I will return the hammer if Freya becomes my bride." Freya's necklace shook with her anger. The gods gathered. Heimdall looked at Thor and said, "Put on a bridal dress, veil and keys, and we will go as if you were Freya, and Loki will be your handmaid." Thor frowned, but agreed, because sometimes a good laugh is the path to safety. In Thrym's hall, the feast was loud. Thor, under the veil, ate like, well, Thor. An ox gone, ate salmon vanished, mead drained in long pools. Thrym whispered, "What a delicate bride." Loki, quick as always, answered, "She has not eaten for 8 nights from love of you." The moment came. The hammer was brought to bless the union. It lay in Thor's lap. Hands moved, veil fell, thunder spoke. The hammer returned home, and the far edges of the world felt safer again. Another day, the sea held its breath. Thor went out in a boat with Hymir, a stern giant with little patience. Thor took the head of an ox for bait and cast his line far into deep grey water. Something older than storms took the hook. Jörmungandr, the world's serpent, coiled around Midgard deep below. The line went tight. The boat groaned. Thor drew the serpent up, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, thunder and ancient coil. Hymir, terrified, cut the line. The serpent sank. Thor's hand lowered, and he looked at the horizon with a promise in his breath. They would meet again at a later time, and the sea itself would watch. In the halls of Utgard, under the guidance of Utgarda Loki, the gods met riddles dressed as contests. Loki tried to eat faster than a thin man across the table, and lost, because the other was fire. Thor tried to empty a drinking horn that was secretly connected to the ocean, and lost, though he made the sea shrink just enough to shape the tides. He tried to lift a cat's paw, and could raise only a little, because the cat was the world's serpent in disguise, and a little movement was already a great feat. He wrestled an old woman and fell to his knee, and there was no shame, for she was age, and no one escapes age. Lessons come in gentleness, and pride can soften without breaking. Freya, bright and generous, looked from Odin's high seat and saw a woman in Jotunheim, Gerda, with a light like summer. He loved her and wanted her, and sent his servant Skirnir to win her hand. The price was heavy. Freya gave away his sword, a weapon that could fight by itself. Love was answered, but a soft echo warned of a day to come when Freya would stand without that blade and face a fire he could not quench. Even the happiest gifts have a cost. Idunn kept the apples that renewed the gods, not to make them boastful, but to keep them steady for their work. Loki, pressed by a giant's trick, lured Idunn out of the halls, and she was carried away. Without her, the gods grew tired and old in a handful of days. Lines deepened, steps slowed, laughter thinned. They turned to Loki, and he made it right, as he often did, flying as a falcon to rescue Idunn, changing her into a nut to carry her home. The gods were young again. The hall felt like spring returning. Not all bonds are easy. The wolf Fenrir grew enormous in Asgard's care. The gods tried to bind him with chains, for they had heard heavy prophecies. He broke each iron as if it were straw. They asked the dwarfs for a binding and received Gleipnir, the soft ribbon with impossible strands. Fenrir looked at it and grew wary. He agreed to be bound if one of the gods placed a hand in his mouth as a pledge of good faith. The hall fell quiet. Tyr stepped forward, steady-eyed, and set his hand between the wolf's teeth. The ribbon held. Fenrir thrashed and could not break it. He closed his mouth, and Tyr lost his hand. Oaths matter. Promises matter. Sometimes the right choice costs more than comfort. The hall learned a deeper silence that day. A darker hush gathered around Baldr, bright and beloved, who began to dream of shadows. Frigg, his mother, asked every being, everything, not to harm him. She asked fire and water, metal and stone, sickness and soil, beasts and birds, every growing thing. All agreed, save one small plant she thought too young to trouble with oaths, mistletoe. The gods, relieved, made a game of it. They threw stones and spears, swung axes, and nothing touched Baldr. He stood untouched, smiling, and the hall cheered. Loki, curious and sharpened by that curiosity, shaped a dart of mistletoe and gave it to Hödur, Baldr's blind brother, guiding his hand. The dart flew and Baldr fell. The hall went silent. Nanna, Baldr's wife, died of sorrow and was placed beside him on the ship. Hermodr rode to Hel to ask for Baldr's return. Hel agreed on one condition, that everything in the world would weep for Baldr. They did. Stones wept, trees wept, metals wept, beasts and birds wept, until one figure, a giantess called Thok, refused. Some say it was Loki in another face. Baldr stayed in Hel's hall, and something changed in the tone of time. A bright note had gone missing, and everyone could hear it. Rest and let your breathing slow. The story holds you. Between tales, the world continued with its seasons. People honored the gods with blot, offerings at holy places, in groves and at carved posts, at halls built for gathering. They wore hammer amulets close to the heart, not as weapons, but as signs of belonging. At the assembly, the law rock heard oaths. Rings were touched, words were kept. The dead were buried with care, sometimes in boats. For every journey is a journey, and the last one deserves a good haul. In some graves, staffs lay beside those who had practiced cedar, signs that knowing fades slowly. Runestones rose by paths, names cut into their faces so memory would stand up against wind and snow. Stories were told and retold. Long after, in Iceland, people wrote them down. The Poetic Edda, a gathering of old verses. The Prose Edda, Snorri's careful handbook for poets and readers. Honest windows, though the house had changed. What we have may be late, but the roots go deeper, and the roots still drink. The age tilted toward twilight. Not at once, but by signs. Winters lengthened, 3 in a row without a summer. People forgot their promises more easily. The bindings at the edge of the world began to loosen. Fenrir strained. Jormungandr turned in its sleep. Loki's chains thinned. The air felt like the breath before lightning. And then the horn sounded. Heimdall lifted Gjallarhorn, and its note reached across the worlds like a bright line. Ships moved, even the ship made of dead men's nails, which is only a way of saying that despair can gather if no one tends to hope. The sky reddened at the edges. From Muspelheim came Surtur, with a sword like a sunrise that burns. The field of battle was wide and bare. Names were simple and clear. Odin faced Fenrir. Thor faced Jormungandr. Tyr faced Garm, the hound. Freyr faced Surtur, without his good sword. Heimdall faced Loki. The clash was a low thunder that did not frighten, only told the truth. Everything born will pass, and endings are part of good stories. Odin fell to the wolf, and a quiet strength stepped forward. Vidar, who had taken long to lace his shoe, placed one foot on the wolf's lower jaw, and with a steady hand tore the wolf's mouth apart. It was not anger, as much as completion. Thor struck the serpent, and the serpent struck Thor. The air filled with a poison that felt like long work ending. Thor took 9 steps and grew still. Tyr and Garm fell together. Freyr stood before Surtur, and without his blade could not hold the fire back. Heimdall and Loki met, watched each other carefully, moved, and both grew still. Surtur's fire rose higher, and the old forests, who remember everything, remembered how to burn. The sea lifted and covered what it needed to cover. The sky darkened and then cleared. This is not the last page. After the deep hush, a green softness returned. From a wood wet with morning, a man and a woman stepped into the open, Lif and Lifthrasir, life and the one who desires life. They ate dew from the grass and laughed at the taste. The sun had a daughter who took her mother's path across the sky, bright and gentle. Fields grew without sowing. Baldr returned and Herder with him, and they were brothers again. Survivors gathered at Idunn, a cleared field near Asgard's old place, and spoke kindly about what had been and what might be. They found pieces of the old treasures and smiled. The story did not insist on a crown. It simply showed a morning and let the day begin. Names remained in small places. A day called Thursday for Thor, towns that bear echoes of old gods, poems that hide little kennings, sea called Whale Road, blood called Battle Sweat, the sun called Sky's Jewel. People remembered in new ways, and the old roots kept drinking the clear water of Urd's well. If you are awake, rest in this quiet. If you are drowsy, let the eyelids fall. We have walked from emptiness to tree, to gods, to loves, to losses, to fire, and to new grass. The tale is complete enough to sleep by, and open enough to dream with. Before you drift, hold a few lines. Giants are not only enemies, they are the rough shoreline where patience learns to walk. Dwarfers are not only smiths, they are the sound of stone, remembering what it can become. Elves are not only bright, they are the small light that makes paths friendly. Gods are not only thunder and gold, they are the shapes we give to courage, to care, to steady work. Humans are not only brief, they are good at tending, at making fire gentle, at telling a story twice so no one feels left behind. Some endings burn, and some endings blossom. Tonight's ending blossoms. There is dew on the grass. The first birds are not yet singing, but they will, soon. If you sleep now, sleep well. If you rest, rest deeply. When you wake, the tree will still be standing. The wells will still be clear. And somewhere, in a dew-soft wood, 2 people will still be laughing at the taste of morning. We end with a simple path, back through what we saw, so the mind can set the story down. Ginnungagap, the quiet before. Niflheim and Muspelheim meeting at the edge. Ymir and Odumla. Buri, then Bor and Besla. Odin, Vili and Ve, shaping the world, setting the sky. Ask and Embla, breath, mind, form. The Norns, Urd, Verdandi, Skuld. Odin and the runes. Cider and Freya. The Æsir and the Vanir, a truce that holds. Giants as neighbours, dwarfs as makers, elves as light. Mjolnir, Gungnir, Draupnir, Skidbladnir, Brisingamen, Gullinbursti, Gleipnir. The wall and the horse, the stolen hammer and the bridal veil, the serpent beneath the grey water, illusions that teach humility, Freya's love and the sword he gave away, Idunn's apples returning spring to tired faces, Fenrir bound, Tyr's hand given for a promise, Baldr's fall, Hermodr's ride, a single tear withheld, the long winter, the horn, the field, the fire, the green morning. If you are still awake, we walk deeper. step by steady step, through halls and shores that we only touched before. If you are asleep, the story will still move along, quietly, and meet you wherever you rejoin it. We begin with the tree, because the tree is a good place to begin again. Yggdrasil stands with 3 great roots. One reaches toward the Frostlands, where Hvergelmir birth as many rivers. One reaches toward the bright halls of the gods, where Urd's well shines like a calm eye. One reaches toward the far places where giants meet and speak. Around the trunk move quiet lives. 4 stags browse the bark, and their names are like soft hoofbeats. Dian, Dvalin, Dunea, Durathror. An eagle sits high in the crown, watching distances that would tire other eyes. A small squirrel, Ratatoska, runs messages and mischief up and down, carrying sharp words between eagle and dragon. Because even in a sacred place there are errands that keep the world awake. Deep at the root, a dragon gnaws, Nidaga, working at what seems unbreakable. Life holds steady, even as something hungry tests the edges. The Norns lift water, brush white clay across the bark, and the tree stays green. From the tree, we follow a crow's shadow to a roof of golden shields. A hall with many doors stands wide, Valhöll, where Odin receives the chosen fallen. The Valkyries pour horn and greet the new arrivals, and every day the company trains and contends, and every evening the boar Serimnir is cooked and eaten, then made whole again, ready for tomorrow's supper. Here the mead runs from a she-goat upon the roof, Heidrun feeding long benches of laughter. Not all of the honoured dead come here. Many go to Folkvanga, Freya's fair field, and her hall Sesrumnir, where the benches are also full and the welcome is gentle. Not every ending is the same, and hospitality has more than one door. Odin moves among these halls like a quiet weather. He keeps company with ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, who fly the world each day and return at dusk to rest upon his shoulders. He keeps company with wolves, Geri and Freki, who sit at his feet and watch with patient eyes. He keeps company with a spear, Gungnir, that does not forget its path, and a ring, Draupnir, that repeats itself in steady measure, as if to say that plenty is created by plenty. He rides the 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, whose hooves find purchase where other hooves would slide. Odin is not only war and frenzy, he is also poems and patience and the price of knowing. Once he came to Mimir's well, wanting a drink from the depths of wisdom beneath the roots. The payment asked was dear, an eye. Odin gave it and left one steady light in the water, so that vision would live in more than one place. He did not walk away blind, he walked away seeing differently. Afterward, he learned 1,000 spells, small and large, to ease pain, to steady fear, to remind a tied knot to become a loose loop again. He learned how to call a wind to carry a ship, and how to hush a wind that had become too proud. He learned how to put a hand upon a chest and say, "Be calm." He learned how to meet a spear with a word and send it into the ground. One day, Odin came to a giant named Vafthrudnir, a wise one with long memory, and they sat for a contest of questions. Odin asked about the first days, and the giant answered. The giant asked about the last days, and Odin answered. They spoke of winds and rivers, of dwarfs and stars, of wolves who chase the sun and moon. At the end, Odin asked the question only he could answer, what he whispered into the ear of his son on the boy's funeral pyre. The giant recognized his guest then, and the contest closed. Wisdom is not only knowing many things, it is also knowing when a conversation has reached its true end. On another road, Odin went in a grey cloak and a wide hat, and met a king who had 2 sons. The king asked for counsel, and Odin offered the gentlest and hardest answer: make the worse man better, and the better man happier. Not all magic is lightning. Much of it is clean advice, carried steadily. We can let Odin walk a while and turn to Thor again, because his footsteps are a comfort. He is a familiar friend on a storm path. He rides in a chariot drawn by 2 goats, Tangjoster and Tangrisnir, whose names sound like teeth meeting bread crust. When he is on the road, he sometimes cooks his goats for supper, and in the morning, with Mjolnir and a blessing, the goats rise whole, shake themselves, and chew as if nothing had happened, provided the bones remain unbroken. Once a farmer's son cracked a bone for the marrow, and the goat rose with a limp. The boy learned that small disrespect carries forward, and Thor learned to keep a closer eye upon dinner. Education comes from both sides. There was a time Thor walked with Loki, and with a young servant, Thjalfi, and his sister, Röskva, swift on their feet. They came upon a giant so large that his glove was a cave for them to sleep in. That giant was called Skrymir, and he tied his food bag with knots Thor could not undo, which is sometimes how a lesson introduces itself. The group went on together, and when they reached the stronghold of Utgard, we come again to the contests we told before: eating against fire, drinking the ocean, lifting the world's serpent disguised as a cat, wrestling old age. On their way out, the host showed them the truth. Their failures had been victories in disguise. Thor had only lifted a paw, but the paw had been part of the serpent that encircles the world. He had not emptied a horn, but the sea was lower by a measure. Good work sometimes feels small, and only later do we see how much moved. Another day brought Thor to a visit with a giant named Hrungnir, who boasted of his stone heart and stone head and stone shield, and came to Asgard with the air of a bad neighbour. A duel was set on the borderland called Grejotunagard. Hrungnir stood with his shield. Thor came with his hammer. Both threw their weapons. Hrungnir's whetstone cracked Mjolnir's handle, and the hammer shattered the stone head, felling the giant. A shard of whetstone lodged in Thor's skull, and there it stayed long after, a small reminder that even victories have splinters. A wise woman named Groa sang charms to loosen the stone, and the story says that Thor, grateful, told her news of her husband who was on his way home. Her joy broke her concentration, and the stone piece remained. A little pain becomes part of the weather of a life, and we learn to walk with it. There was another smith tale that shaped the halls. Sif, Thor's wife, woke one morning with her hair shorn. Loki, restless as the moon on water, had cut it in the night for a prank that turned out not to be funny. Thor's brow darkened. Loki promised to mend his trouble and went to the dwarfs, to Ivaldi's sons, who made for Sif hair of real gold that grew like living grain upon her head. They also made Skidbladnir, that perfect ship, and Gungnir, Odin's spear. Loki bragged and wagered with another pair of smiths, Brokkr and Sindri, that they could not craft treasures of equal wonder. They set to work with the bellows, making a boar with shining bristles, a ring that renewed itself, and a hammer that always found its mark. Loki tried to spoil the work, stinging, distracting, breaking the rhythm, and one handle came out a touch too short. Even so, the gods judged Mjolnir the best of the gifts. Loki lost the wager, and the smith wanted his head. Loki allowed the head, but not the neck, since the bet had named only the head. The dwarf sewed Loki's lips shut for a while. Words matter. Promises matter. Mischief has a price and a lesson, and sometimes a neat stitch. Listen to the sea for a moment, and we can visit Egor, the sea giant with a hall of shining ale. The gods often feasted with him. At one such feast, a boast rose that needed a bigger kettle than anyone owned to brew enough beer for all. Thor and Tyr went to Hymir to borrow his enormous cauldron. Hymir was not generous. After trials and a fishing trip where the sea held its breath, Thor hefted the cauldron himself, lifted it to his head, and walked away with it like a man wearing an iron crown. Ægir brewed a feast that could satisfy even Thor, and for an evening, old grievances softened like wax near a candle. Loki arose in that hall and spoke too sharply, counting old slights, opening old scars. The feast grew quiet, then tense. Names were thrown like small spears. This is a truth of long friendships. They contain old weather that sometimes tries to return. The night ended, as nights do, but something leaned toward a later, heavier hour. Between the bright hall and the far fields lies a shore of quieter stories. Heimdall keeps the rainbow bridge, Bifrost, which sings softly when someone crosses. He sees far and hears grass growing, a way of saying he misses very little. He was born of 9 mothers, wave sisters who gave him gifts of perception. He carries a horn, Gjallarhorn, whose note goes out like a tuneful path. He guards with patience, and patience is guarding. Tyr stands at the Law Rock. He is not only the courage of battle, but the courage of a hard decision kept steady. He knows that a binding oath is not a word tossed into a wind. It is a beam that holds up a roof, and if you remove it, the house complains. People look to him when their hands shook before a necessary task. Baldr, we have mourned. We can speak of him a while longer, because loss teaches us to talk gently. He dreamed of shadows and told his mother, and she moved through the world, asking all things to be harmless to him. People sometimes do everything they can, and yet leave one small corner untouched, because we cannot think of everything. Mistletoe stood unnoticed in the hedge. After his death, Hermoda rode for 9 nights to Hel's Hall, past valleys so deep that the air seemed to hold its breath, past a bridge that shone with gold over the river Gjöll, past a maiden whose name remembers snow. He asked for Baldr's return, and the answer came with a condition that almost worked. The one refusal is a shape you will see often in quiet stories. It means that grief must be carried a while. It does not mean that love becomes smaller. Sometimes love becomes slower and learns to walk a long road. We can ease from grief into a poem, because poems carry grief better than many other things. In old halls, skalds spoke verses built with strong beams called kennings. A sea could be called a whale road. Blood could be called the sweat of the sword. Battle could be the storm of spears. Thor's hammer could be the friend of men. And Loki's tongue could be called a fish that swims in every conversation. These turns of phrase were more than ornament. They were handles to lift heavy meaning without straining the hand. Runas could be cut upon wood or stone, and each carried sound and also suggestion. A single stave could mean an R, and also a ride, and also the sense of journeying towards something worthwhile. Stones were raised beside roads, telling who made a bridge, who gave a gift, who lay beneath this marker and should be remembered. We speak names here slowly, for the same reason those stones were cut. Memory is a good roof in a rainy place. There was a time when a god stood on a shore and claimed a new name to walk among humans. People called him Rig. He visited 3 households. In the first, a humble hut, where the bread was coarse. He shared their table, and later a child was born, who grew to farm and herd and shape the ground with steady work. In the second, a neat hall with polished benches. He shared their table, and a child was born, who learned to craft and trade and keep a ledger. In the third, a strong house full of shine. He shared their table, and a child was born, who learned to rule and judge and make law. The poem that tells this is a reminder that a society is not one thing alone. It is several kinds of good work that should respect one another. Harsh words were traded once on a shore between Thor and a ferryman who named himself Baldr. The two argued with old jests and bragging, a long exchange of wit and pride. Thor wanted to cross, and the boatman refused, and the conversation grew like a tree with crooked branches. In the end, Thor walked away and found another ford. Not every argument needs a winner. Some only need to end. We can speak of Loki's children because their stories are woven carefully into the larger pattern. With the giantess Angerboda, he had 3 offspring who would matter greatly. The wolf Fenrir, whom we have met, who will make a wide mouth of the world at the last battle. The serpent Ginnungagap, who lies in the sea and measures Midgard's circle. And Hel, a daughter given a realm in the north, where she keeps the dead who are not battle-fallen, a stern but not cruel keeper. The gods, hearing prophecies, if we can call them that, made choices that bound, cast, and assigned these children to edges. Those choices were not without cost. When we act from fear alone, we often plant the very seeds we worried about. Yet the story is kind enough to show that duty and kindness can live even in difficult places. Hel is not a cartoon of malice. Her hall is a place of quiet continuance, and people abide there as people abide anywhere, with routines, with memories, with visits, and with the sound of footsteps in a corridor. Loki's path bent toward a last bright trouble. After Baldr's death and other injuries, the gods sought him. He fled, took the form of a salmon, and hid in a waterfall's froth. They made a net for the first time, and learned a new way to catch a quick thing. When they held him, they bound him with the guts of his own son, which turned to iron and laid him beneath the earth. A serpent hung above, dripping burning venom onto his face. His wife, Sigyn, stood with a bowl to catch the drops, and when she turned to empty it, the drip struck and Loki twisted, and people say this is why the ground shakes now and then. It is a good story for a quake. It gives the earth a reason to sigh and shift. Let the light change slowly, and we can look at daily life in the north. Because these myths were told around real fires. People marked the year with feasts. Yule in the long night, offerings at sowing and harvest. At the first catch of the season, at a child's naming, at a couple's joining, at the raising of a hall beam, at a ship's launching. They made oat cakes and brewed ale. They dried fish and cured meat. They wove and carved and mended. They told stories as work went on, because stories fit well with hands that are busy. A smith might speak a charm over iron. A mother might hum a half-remembered verse as she sets a child down. A farmer might lift a small hammer amulet from his shirt and touch it to a new threshold for luck. The gods were not only in high halls, they were also in mud on a boot and steam rising from a wooden tub. Crossing the sea brought them to markets and meetings far away, to river towns, to islands, to walled cities that smelled of spices, and even to new farms set on old forests. They bargained, fought, took, paid, traded, married, and sometimes they settled and stayed. They learned new prayers. They heard new names for old things. They built churches on the sites of old groves, and old groves learned the sound of bells. In Iceland, a decision was made at the great outdoor assembly to accept a new faith for the sake of peace, and to allow the old practices quietly at home for a while, so that no one's hearth fire would feel insulted. A wise choice makes a long winter shorter. We have spoken of dwarfs as makers. We can pause a while with them. Dvalin, who wanders, and his kin work close to heat with Khan, making things that last. They know how to set the temper of a blade so that it sings clean through a problem. They know how to line a cup with thin gold so that a king thinks the drink tastes better. They know how to carve runes so small on a ring that the metal remembers a promise. Their halls are not only dark, they are also full of laughter that sounds like hammer blows from a distance. When you lift a well-made tool, you feel them a little in your hand. Elves are bright in old stories, not the small winged ones of later books, but tall and quiet, like summer dusk standing still among birches. Their land is near and not near. People leave a bowl of cream or a piece of bread and feel a presence pass by like a friendly draught. The word for elves shares a root with words for white, shining. It is enough to say that sometimes a light comes through leaves in a way that makes a person stand still and think kindly of their neighbours. We can walk back to treasure and see how metal can carry a curse. A family of otter hunters lived near a waterfall. One son liked to take the shape of an otter and sit on a rock with a fish. Loki, passing, threw a stone and killed him, thinking him only an animal. The father and brothers demanded a weregild, payment for the killing, enough gold to cover the skin of the otter. Loki took a dwarf's hoard and a ring named Anvaranaut and brought it to pay the debt. The pelt was covered, but one whisker showed, and the ring was needed to cover it. The dwarf had cursed the gold and the ring, and sorrow followed the payment like a shadow follows a pillar in afternoon light. This thread runs into the Völsung stories, where a dragon lies upon wealth that should have served life, and a hero learns that cleverness without kindness can ruin a day quickly. A hero named Sigurd learned to forge a better sword after two broke. He slew the dragon Fafnir, who crawled along on his belly like a great armoured thought. When Sigurd tasted the heart's blood on his thumb, he began to hear what birds were saying in a tree, and they did not discuss the weather. They spoke of trust and betrayal, and the right road to take that evening. A queen named Brynhild, who had once been a shield in a wall of shields, waited upon a mountain surrounded by a ring of fire. These are stories braided with other stories, and we will not pull the whole braid tonight, only smooth it and let it rest. Return with me to clear names and simple paths. Heimdall listens. Frigg sits in her high seat and sees many things and says few. Freya receives travellers kindly and wears a necklace that glows like the low sun on water. Njord keeps the high call of seabirds near his hall and never gets tired of it. Freya walks the field and hears barley deciding to grow. Skadi, once a giant, chose a husband by looking at feet alone and chose wrong for laughter's sake, then found her own path and the sound of skis on fresh snow. Bragi makes words that fit the human hand. Idunn keeps her orchard with care. Sif lifts her hair and it falls like ripe wheat across her shoulders. Tyr stands without one hand, and his balance is still perfect. Thor makes a game with children by letting them glance at the hammer, and then looking surprised when they are brave enough to touch it. In the far hall, Hel does her work without hurry. Half of her face is as we are used to seeing a face. Half is as a bone remembers itself. She hears petitions and makes decisions that seem cold only if you have not managed a household in winter. She knows who is needed in the green world still, and who can rest now without leaving anything undone. On quiet nights, songs called Havamal speak cool counsel. Offer a gift if you would receive one. Go to bed early if you would be wise. Do not mock a traveller's worn shoes, because you do not know where they have been. Keep firewood dry, and words kinder than you are tempted to make them. A friend's house should not be far. A mind that knows enough to be silent is a useful guest. These sayings are simple, and they hold up like a good spoon. When the last light leaves the west, we can walk once more toward Ragnarök. Not to retell the battle, but to notice how a culture steadied itself by speaking of endings without panic. They told these things not to frighten their children, but to teach a kind of honesty that sits well at a table. Yes, a winter may come too long. Yes, a binding may break at the wrong moment. Yes, brave people will fall. And yes, after the fire, green returns. The sun has a daughter. A field grows without sowing. Brothers reconcile. Pieces of old treasure are found, and someone says, "We can use this again," and someone else says, "Let us make something new." Between those ends and beginnings lies the day we are in. It is not a mistake to love it. It is not a mistake to make bread and share it. It is not a mistake to raise a beam and hang a sprig upon it and speak a blessing no one needs to write down. The old stories were not written to make us stare only backward. They were written to set our shoulders and soften our eyes. If you are still with me, we can take a slow walk through the 9 realms, like an evening stroll that takes a long time because there is so much to point at. Asgard, high and orderly, with halls named for brightness and joy. Valhall is one, and Vingolf a friendly place. A field called Idunn lies nearby, where meetings feel like the first day of spring. The sound of work reaches softly from forges and kitchens, and a harp somewhere remembers an old tune without sadness. Vanaheim, wide with shoreline, where salt air reaches into storehouses and dries fish, and kelp hangs like banners. People knot ropes with a skill that feels like prayer. The wind changes, and everyone looks up, smiling. Alfheim, lit like morning in a birch grove. The paths here are not straight, but they are easy to follow if you look without hurrying. There is music here that sounds like water paying attention to stones. Midgard, our middle world, a circle bound by sea. A garden with walls that are sometimes too low and sometimes too high. Farmland stitched with hedges and ditches. Towns with timber frames and shingles that clap in a gale. Harbours with gulls that complain and then fall asleep on a post. In winter, blue smoke from a chimney. In summer, the smell of new hay. In autumn, apples. In spring, wet boots by a door. Jotunheim, vast, with mountains that lift their shoulders into cloud, with glacial rivers that murmur in a language that has no small talk. Giants speak slowly and often correctly. They are not wrong to think of old treaties, and they are not wrong to watch the sky when it turns a certain colour. Svartalfheim and Nidavellir, clefts and caverns and workshops, bright with red-orange coal and yellow-white fire, light that falls across iron like a blessing. Tongs on a bench, a quench bucket with steam rising as if someone is telling a secret. Hammers strike time. A song with no words keeps the rhythm. Helheim, cool and careful, with fences in good repair and gates that do not slam. There are rooms named for ease and rooms named for rest. Visitors come and go with reasons. No one raises their voice. The North taught people a quiet courtesy in the face of weather, and that attitude runs here also. Muspelheim, heat at the edge of thought. It is not a place to vacation, but without it, nothing would begin. The bright ones who live here keep their distance because they understand distance. They do not gossip. They know their hour and wait for it with discipline. Niflheim, deep cold and deep memory. Rime and fog and the taste of iron on the tongue. It is not cruel. It is reservation and respect. It holds stillness the way a pond holds a perfect reflection if the wind is kind. When we say 9 realms, we are saying a good number for remembering. The world is not 9, and it is not 1. It is what it needs to be to hold the story without spilling. We can return for a while to the wells. Urd's well receives clear water and sends it along. People come there with questions and go away with better questions. Mimir's well keeps an eye in its depth, and when leaves fall upon it, they do not rot quickly. They rest and become lace. Vergelmir sends rivers outward, many as beads on cords. Names like Svol and Gunthra and Fjörm, because naming a thing helps you be friendly with it. If you know a river's name, you will not try to cross it in flood. If your eyes are closing, you can let them. If they are tugging upward, we will offer a few more gentle paths, and then we will set you down in a soft place. There is a story where a small, clever dwarf named Alvis came to claim a bride from Thor's household, and Thor did not like the arrangement. He set a riddle game that lasted through the night, asking the names of things in the speech of gods, and of elves, and of dwarfs, and of giants, and of the dead. Alvis answered each with the exact term, because scholars live in small shapes sometimes. Thor kept him talking until dawn, and the dwarf turned to stone when the sun rose. This is a story about time management disguised as a riddle play. There is a story where a whisper was carried in a room full of light and remembered too well by someone who liked to build with whispers. Stories are not only for children. They are for the parts of us that still want to be warned kindly. There is a story where a farmer helped an old traveller and was helped in return, because hospitality is not a shop where you count change. It is a weather that returns to you if you keep your door nicely oiled. We can make a small garland of names now, not to cram your head, but to show a pattern. Freya rides in a chariot drawn by cats and takes care that they are not teased. Njord loves the sea and likes the smell of tar, but his wife Skadi loves the mountain and the sound of skis in powder, and they tried to live in each other's houses for a while, and then agreed to keep 2 homes and visit a mature solution. Bragi's tongue is not quick like Loki's. It is steady like a boat that does not capsize. Idunn's apples are not magic in a noisy way. They are medicine carried in a basket. Frigg knows many things and chooses carefully which to say aloud so that the hall stays warm without drafts. Let us add small pictures of ordinary days. A carpenter uses a plumb line and smiles at how straight a new wall is. A child puts a fishbone back into the bucket because it will not make good soup. A woman looks at cloud shape and knows there will be rain by evening. A man rubs tallow into leather straps and hums an old half-verse about the proper way to tie a knot. Two neighbors discuss a fence and both nod because they have decided to move it half a pace, and it will be fine. A boat's keel is eased into water, and the water accepts it without complaint. An old woman sits by the door at sunset and mends a woolen sock. A dog sighs. The night is not dangerous. It is just night. The myths we carry are not only about hammer and spear and fire. They are about the right way to sit on a bench so that an anxious person will settle. They are about the right moment to bring out an extra cup and pour. They are about how a person can lose a hand and keep their balance. They are about how a person can lose a son and keep their language from breaking. They are about how a person can lose a war inside themselves and still wake early and feed the goats, because the goats did not sign the treaty. Steadiness is holiness in these stories. If you have travelled this far, you can choose a small keepsake to carry to bed. Choose a name, or a place, or a line. You could choose the meeting of frost and fire, and the first breath that rose from it. You could choose Yggdrasil, and the way water and clay keep even a great thing alive. You could choose three sisters by a well who do their work without applause. You could choose a god who gave an eye and learned to speak slower. You could choose a hammer with a short handle that still does the job. You could choose a ribbon that looks like silk and behaves like iron. You could choose a wolf who taught an entire hall about promises. You could choose a bright young god whose absence taught everyone how precious gentle laughter is. If you are still drifting with me, we can open a few quiet doors that we passed before, and let the rooms breathe. Kvasir was born from peace, when two groups mixed their spit in a bowl to seal a truce, and from that bowl a person rose, so wise that all felt calmer when he entered a hall. Two dwarfs, Fjalar and Galar, killed him, and mixed his blood with honey to make a mead that gave poetry and learning. Later, a giant named Sutunga took that mead and hid it in a mountain under the care of his daughter, Gunnlod. Odin wanted the mead for the world. He called himself Baldr, worked for Sutunga's brother, and asked for a drink as payment. He drilled a hole into the mountain with a bit named Rati, slipped in as a snake, sat with Gunnlod for 3 nights, and she let him drink 3 sips. He drank all 3 vats in those 3 sips, turned into an eagle, and flew home to share the mead. Some spilled as he flew, and people say that spill became the rough verse anyone can grab on a busy day. The rest he gave to poets who listen before they speak. The lesson is gentle. Wisdom is a trust. Poetry is a commons. If a song visits you, treat it kindly and pass it on. At the beginning of the old war, a woman called Gullveig came to the halls, bright with gold and the knowing craft. They tried to burn her 3 times, and she stood up smiling 3 times. She also walked under another name, Haider, and taught Saidr the weaving of possibility. The war between Æsir and Vanir sparked, then settled into truce and exchange, because even gods learn that the world is happier when skill meets skill instead of blade meeting blade. From that peace came new songs and better harvests. Gefjon once took 4 sons and turned them into oxen, and ploughed a great piece of land out of the old country and dragged it into the sea to make a new island, a shape of fields that still remembers being furrowed by love. When you look at a map and see a bay that looks like a bite taken from the coast, you can think of Gefjon and how moving earth can be a quiet kind of miracle. There are gods who do not stand in every story, but their names are like good tools ready in the hand. Ular knows the bull and the ski, and the silence of snow that tells a hunter where not to step. Forseti sits in a bright hall and helps people speak until they do not need to raise their voices anymore. Herder, blind and beloved, teaches us to be gentle with games and careful with friends. Vidar is silent, patient as leather that has been stitched twice, and will take one strong step when the day asks. Vali is quick to answer a wrong done to his brother, and reminds us that some answers should not be delayed. Nana is a name that sounds like kindness. Air is the steady hand that heals. Sif's hair falls like ripe grain. Bragi takes a breath before a word, and makes the word land softly. Idunn smiles and opens her basket, and spring comes into the room. We spoke of Idunn's apples. We can add a morning to that tale. A giant named Thiazi, in eagle shape, carried her away. Without her, faces lengthened and steps grew slow. Loki, who had played a part in the trouble, played a part in the mending. He borrowed falcon feathers, flew to Thiazi's hall, turned Idunn into a nut for safety, and flew home with her in his claws. Thiazi chased in eagle form, and the gods, seeing feathers and fearing delay, stacked wood at the walls of Asgard, and set it alight as the eagle crossed, so that his wings caught fire and he fell. The lesson is simple. Keepers of renewal must be guarded with attention. Also, sometimes a prankster is part of the repair crew. Down among the waves, Ægir brews ale in a hall, where the firelight makes patterns on the ceiling like fish scales. His wife, Ran, keeps a net, and sailors speak her name with a mixture of respect and carefulness. When a storm takes a ship, people say the sea wife has gathered new guests and set places for them. It is a way of talking about grief so that the table still has room for soup. In quiet weather, the sea is a friend. In wild weather, the sea requests silence. The old stories keep both truths without argument. Listen for small heralds at the edges of time. Roosters crow when ages turn. One on the farm below, red and cheerful. One among the gods, gold and clear. One in hell's realm, soot dark and honest. They do not change events. They announce what is already arriving, and sometimes the announcement helps our breathing. We spoke of the dead and where they go. Many go to hell's realm, where they live in rooms with orderly shelves and corridors, where a person can walk without bumping their shoulder. Warriors go to halls that fit their habit, some to Odin's benches, some to Freya's field. Sailors taken by a hard wave find a separate kind of welcome. None of these are punishments. They are accommodations, like bedding a guest in the room where they will sleep best. The living kept law in open air. People met at a thing, an assembly on the grass, with stones for markers and a rock for speaking. Oaths were sworn on a ring, kept by the priest of the place, and words had the weight of iron. Years later, a man chosen to speak for the island lay under a cloak for a day and a night, and then stood and said, "For the sake of peace, let us walk one road in public, and those who must walk two roads can do so quietly at home, and both fires will keep their light." There is a kind of courage that sits and thinks before it speaks. The world of heroes braided into the mythic wood. Names like Helgi came singing through spears and returned again in new bodies, with memories humming like a low harp. A ring won badly carried a storm into every marriage it entered. A dragon lay upon a heap of wealth as if the coins could heat a cold heart. A smith called Regan taught a boy called Sigurd to make a sword that did not break, and the boy learned to listen to birds and to advice from those who meant him well. the sleep-friendly version of those tales is this: if a treasure costs you your kindness, it is the wrong treasure. If a promise requires you to lie to someone who trusts you, it is the wrong promise. If a love asks you to give up your courage or your good sense, it is not a love that will grow wheat. We can walk with Thor again to a river that rose against him too quickly. A giant's daughter stood upstream and made the flood higher by sending her own water into it. Thor braced himself, placed a rock, spoke a short word that reminded the river of its usual banks, and the water stepped back. Later, when he came to a hall and someone tried to press him into a seat that would have crushed him, he pushed the chair legs into the floor and into the backs of two who had meant him harm. This is a soft way of saying, you may put a weight on me, but I do not have to carry your plan. The gods walk, argue, reconcile, build, and mend. They are not perfect, they are practice. Odin bargains and pays. Frigg knows and keeps. Freya loves and teaches. Njord hammers planks into a hull and calls it a prayer. Skadi ties her hair up and smiles at the first mark a ski makes on a hillside. Tyr holds out a hand and keeps his promise, knowing the price. Heimdall watches and does not complain about the length of the shift. Idunn tends an orchard and brings a basket when the room is tired. Bragi clears his throat and the table grows quiet because a good story is about to start. Sif laughs at a child's joke and means it. Thor arrives and the weather improves inside the house. There is a story called Grimnismal, where Odin, tested and testing, sits between two fires and speaks long descriptions of halls and fields and rivers and creatures. If you ever have time to sit between two lamps with a cup in your hand and say the names of places you love, that is the same kind of magic. Naming makes memory sit down and stay a while. When the world grew thin at the edges, 3 winters pressed together, and people forgot their oaths. The bindings loosened. We walked through that heavy hour already. What matters now is how the tale lands. A green morning, 2 people tasting dew, the daughter of the sun. Brothers who look at one another and nod. Fields that need no plough to begin. A circle of survivors speaking without scorn. A hammer found in grass. A ring found in a fold of earth. A spear leaning on a wall. All of them tools again, instead of trophies. Let us set the old benches back in order, lift cups, and speak blessings that work in any century. May your roof hold in wind. May your kind word travel farther than your sharp word. May your oath fit you. May your firewood be dry when you need it. May your door be oiled. May your guests leave your house more rested than they arrived. May your children find you honest. May your elders find you patient. May your grief come in honest waves, and your joy in small daily handfuls that add up to a good harvest. May your sleep be the kind that does not argue with itself. If you are awake, we can pick up a few smooth stones and skip them across a clear pond of names and images. Each skip is a reminder. A raven crossing a wide sky at dusk. A ring repeating itself for the sake of sharing. A ribbon that looks gentle and is stronger than iron. A hammer with a short handle that still does the job. A spear that returns and asks for better aims next time. A ship that folds and unfolds as needs change. A necklace warm as dawn. A boar whose golden bristles light a path in winter. An apple lifted from a basket into a grateful hand. A goat shaking itself and trotting away, well again. A wolf learning that promises are made of bone. A serpent turning under grey water and deciding to wait. A mother asking everything in the world to be kind to her son. A a single plant left out of the list because sometimes we are tired. A horse with 8 legs, running across a sky where paths need to be made quickly. A bridge that sings softly under careful feet. A hall with many doors and no one turned away. A field where the first meeting, after a long winter, feels like a feast even before the food arrives. A tree being brushed with white clay so it will stay green. A well that keeps an eye for someone who gave it. 3 sisters lifting water and not demanding applause. If you are drowsy, let the lids fall. If you wish a little more, we will make one last round of the 9 places. Not to instruct, only to bless. Asgard, may your doors be wide and your counsels slow. Vanaheim, may your nets be mended and your tides on time. Alfheim, may your paths stay soft for quiet feet. Midgard, may your hedges shelter, your tables be long and your winters honest. Jotunheim, may your mountains teach patience and your treaties hold. Svartalfheim, may your fires burn clean and your hammers find the rhythm. Nidavellir, may your work be praised by those who use it well. Helheim, may your rooms be orderly, your gates calm and your halls gentle to the tired. Muspelheim, may your flame remember beginnings more often than endings. Niflheim, may your stillness keep what needs keeping and let go what can move. The story folds itself like Skidbladnir, neat and ready for the next voyage. We set it upon a shelf in a good hall. Outside, a simple weather waits. If you sleep now, sleep deeply. If you rest with eyes open, rest as if the chair is glad to hold you. When you wake, the tree will still be standing. The wells will still be clear. Somewhere, a rooster will be practicing quietly, not ready to crow yet, just remembering the note. Somewhere, 2 people will be trying the taste of morning for the first time again and finding it very funny. Ginnungagap, Niflheim, Muspelheim, Ymir, Odumla, Buri, Bor, and Bestla, Odin, Vili, Ve, Askanembla, Urd, Vedandi, Skuld, Runas, Cider, Peace Between Halls, Giants, Dwarfs, Elves, Spirits, Treasures, Heirlooms, Tools, a Wall and a Horse, a Lost Hammer and a Laugh, a Hook in grey water, Illusions that taught humility, a Love that cost a sword, Apples that returned spring, a ribbon and a hand in a wolf's mouth, a bright one who fell, and a world that wept, 3 winters, a horn's long line, old names standing up one by one, fire doing its duty, green returning, leaf and Lifthrasir, a new sun, a field that grows because it can, peace chosen, benches repaired, doors opened, names spoken kindly, sleep well.